So hello everyone, good evening, good morning, good afternoon for wherever you are connecting from. Welcome to our Raising Multilinguals Live this evening. And as you see, Tetsu is not here yet. I hope that he will join us in a minute or as soon as he can. But anyway, I'm very happy that and very honored that we have a great guest today, that is Dr. Alice Fiorentino. She is ingénieure pédagogique at the University of Savoie, Mont, Blanc. She previously worked as a postdoc researcher at the University of Verona in Italy and as a PhD candidate at the University of Reims Champagne-Ardenne. And her research interests are language learning and plurilingual approaches to language education. So in this session, we are going to pick a little bit your brain about many different aspects, but as the title says, we want to learn more about learning related languages and if we understood more than what we thought. And you will enlighten us about also your research done with adopted children and more. So I'm very happy to ask you maybe the first question. It's a very, very general one. So please tell us a little bit more about yourself, your interests, what made you study research about languages and the particular topic from this evening.
Okay, so good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me today to have this opportunity to explain my research. So to start, as a general presentation, I have to say that I've always been interested in languages since I was younger. I always wondered how language worked and how people get to learn languages. Especially I was admired about bilingualism. It was like a magic for me, I obtained my PhD in 2018 after working 7 years as Italian as second language teacher. And I ran my PhD researches in the framework of the European 7th Framework Program called MIME, Mobility and Inclusion in Multilingual Europe. And that's how I got interested in plurilingualism, which is a specific branch of linguistics.
Yes.
So that's a general presentation of my studies and researches.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's good that you mentioned this term of plurilingualism. I know that it's a little bit debated among linguists, where in some countries the term of multilingualism is not seen as so adequate when talking about people, and then they rather prefer the term of plurilingualism. Right, so this is more the approach that you are following maybe the direction that is taken in Italy and France, just to name two, because I just told everyone that you come from Italy and France, and this is where you gathered all your experience also in the field of linguistics. So yes, thank you very much for sharing this. So can you maybe tell us a little bit more about your work with transnational adoptive families? Maybe you can even quickly explain what you mean about, or what one can understand about transnational adoptive families.
Yeah, so transnational adoptive families are those families who choose to adopt a child from abroad. So, of course, the language is at the core of this process. So, at first, my interest in transnational adoptive families was of linguistic nature. Basically, I wonder how parents and their child communicate in the very first period of their knowledge. I made the hypothesis, and that at that time was an hypothesis, that they would have to go for rudimentary and spontaneous strategies of communication because, as probably some of you know, parents do not always have the time to prepare themselves linguistically wise. So at that time, I made my research on intercomprehension as a strategy of communication in the framework of mime. And intercomprehension, just to give a definition, is when two people or more than two people speaking related languages belonging to the same linguistic family, manage to understand each other, speaking their own language, so speaking their first language, and exhibit comprehension towards the language of the interlocutor. And this is we can say that there is a spontaneous intercomprehension, like in the case of adoptive families, and then more expert level intercomprehension, like in education, for example.
Okay, so can we maybe an example? I mean, I quoted once a nice video on YouTube about young people who were talking to each other, one speaking Spanish, the next one Portuguese, and the third one Italian, and they would intercomprehend each other without having studied each other's language. So is this what we can understand with this term?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, we know that like almost 90% of lexical of words, let's say, are in Romance languages, because I focus my attention to Romance languages, are of Roman origin. So there is already there is the vocabulary, but not only the vocabulary. The intercomprehension works at different level. Phonologically, syntaxically, and so on and so forth. Yeah, and my discovery with transnational adoptive family, I made the hypothesis that they would have communicate like this, and actually, it was the cases for to a certain extent, of course, not 100%, but it was there.
Yes, so I assume, let's maybe focus on these adoptive families, because we are talking now about people who are speaking and children who are speaking. So it's not about babies or toddlers who are not verbal yet, but about older children who have been exposed to language blue, and then they get to live in a family with language yellow and green, and they try to understand each other, or it is an advantage then if these languages are somehow similar, so that they can be understood, that each one of the family can understand the other. Is this
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And how old were the children in this study that you did? How old were they?
They were all school-age children, some from 6 above. Yeah. So yeah, the point is that adopted children are often considered as subtractive bilinguals, because they forget their language very fast. But in my case, children, my research focused on school-age children, namely children who already had a good grasp of the first language. So that was the point. Okay, so they already were familiar with one language, and they were familiar to communicate in that language.
Okay, so they were, okay. This is a very important point, because especially when we talk about adoptive families, sometimes we say, okay, I'm adopting a child that is maybe 2 years old and is not that verbal yet in the other language. But what you were doing were observing children who are verbal in these languages already. Hello, Tetsu. Welcome
Hello.
to the screen as well. Yeah. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
yes.
Actually, in Italy, the school-age children are a vast, not the majority, but a vast portion of the adopted children. So that's why I focused on this group of children. Yeah.
And can you maybe share a little bit about what you found out? I mean, because I think the findings are very, very interesting, not only for those who adopt children, but also for other reasons that we might dig into a little bit later. What is now about these adopted children remembering the language of their first caregivers? So how did this work?
Well, about remembering, the data are not well settled, so I cannot really, and plus my research was more a longitudinal, qualitative study. But my data show that when parents exhibit comprehension and so receptive knowledge of the language of the child uses this language longer after his or her adoption, comparing to when parents do not show receptive knowledge, as in the case of non-related language, for example, Russian and Italian.
Yes.
And for me, that means that intercomprehension was used as a strategy of adjustment and accommodation. So I mean to soften the transition towards the new situation, and for the parents to show empathy towards them, so that in the short and medium term. In the long term, I can say that it helps parents to show a positive attitude towards the language of the child since the beginning, because the beginning is the most crucial part. And that could help later on in the child's life, because interactional data show that, of course, as we assume, adoptive children struggle between multiple identities that go beyond language, of course. Yes. So it can be suggested that when parents, if parents want to help children to handle with these multiple identity attitudes, yes, early attitudes are really important. So the message we give them from the beginning.
Yes, so the attitude of the parents are very decisive, yes. And you were talking about receptive knowledge of the language. Can you maybe explain what you mean with receptive knowledge of the language? Or
so basically, receptive knowledge is the global sense we grasp from the language. So, and it works very well, like in functional situation, let's say. So when my data show that the context helps a lot, because in all families, routines are very important. So basically, the language is the caption of the action. So the child was used to this routine, and so the language goes goes as a caption of this routine, and that helped not switching immediately to the parents' language, help the child to feel comfortable, and at the same time to grasp some language. So it has also a learning value, if you want.
Yes, absolutely, because a child that is adopted needs time to learn the language of the parents or the community where he or she is living. So
exactly, that's the point. Yeah. So adjustment for me was really a key word.
Okay, I'm gonna say hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Very, very, very sorry. Got tied up in something and it just couldn't get untied. But anyways, thank you for getting things started. So we are in the middle of talking about receptive knowledge and how adopted children remember the earlier languages. Right? That's sort of what I was hearing. Okay, I mean, I wish I was there to hear the whole beginning. Like, I wanted to know everything about your beginnings with the world of languages. But is it okay if we could have like a very quick summary, just a 10-15 second summary of what you're talking about?
Of my beginning with the language?
Yes, like how did you get into the world of languages and the research, your passion in languages, and then I could sort of connect that to the remaining part of the.
Well, it is not easy, because I always know that I would have ended studying languages because even as a child, I was saying intrigued by languages. So especially by bilinguals, because unfortunately I am monolingual because
You're not monolingual.
No,
I
you're not.
don't even know dialect,
Absolutely
so
not.
I'm really monolingual.
No.
Even if I tell my students that monolingualism doesn't exist, but
No,
still.
exactly.
And so I remember watching a bilingual children and think, oh my God, you're so lucky. It was like a magic, I was saying. So, and that brought me to study language at school and then at university. But then I met Intercomprehension like this. I mean, it was like a discovery even for me. And it was even a greatest discovery to see how it works and the value that it can have in multilingual communication. Even if we are brought to think that English is important, which is, it's very important. We are the living proof that it is important. But Intercomprehension, I think that has something to say as well. So I like to think more about a complementarity of strategies, which we can use according to situations and according to the value. And in the case of transnational adoptive families, for me, the real value was empathy. And if we can extend probably to many others contexts, but in the transnational adoptive families was really important to let the child adjust to the situation at his or her own pace. And for me, it was really, really clear from the beginning because I got the chance to observe the families. So I was there, so I observed them speaking. And for the child not to be pushed into the new language when so much was changing around him, I think was really important. Yeah.
Well, empathy, I think, is a very important word. It's really to place yourself in the shoes, in the skin of the child, and understand that the child is in a completely new environment. So yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the great things is that language allow us to do that. So related language allow us to do that because they have so much in common. We were saying vocabulary, so structures of words. So why not?
Yes. And you mentioned before, I'm doing this a little bit also for Tetsu to catch up. You mentioned before also that, well, you focused on school-age children, but you knew their story, yeah? You knew when they were adopted and if they were already verbal when they were adopted, so you could somehow also have a feeling, or maybe the parents shared with you how the first periods were with the child. So as you just mentioned, you focus also on, you emphasize the empathy and following the child, letting the child lead a little bit, also the parents, and the parents maybe being also more understanding towards the heritage language of the children. The idea would obviously be, I think, that the parents, the adoptive parents, would know and speak and welcome also the language where the child comes from the first caregivers. Did you observe, or were in this group that you analyzed with this focus, were there children who were very verbal already when they joined the family and that had difficulties with adjusting, or were there also children who were not verbal when they joined the family? I can imagine that there is a difference in the whole dynamics of juggling the different languages and adjusting also from the children, if the child is verbal or not. What could you tell us about that?
Well, as I told you, my study was longitudinal. That means that I observed 3 families. I interviewed 20 families, and then I observed 3 of them. So the 3 child were almost verbal at the same to the same extent. One was very verbal, and we just spoke Spanish like everyone understands him. He just didn't care, and it was really funny to hear sometimes problems with the parents. It was really, really funny. But the parents were very good at it. They did not stop when they did not really grasp the meaning. They just let him talk, and then they would have understood later. And maybe the second one was a little bit less verbal. And in that case, I think that parents will take the lead. Yeah, because it is family. I mean, family communication is a process of building up. So in some cases, the child leads. In some cases, the parents, and not all of the parents are the same way. So sometimes it was a mother, sometimes it was a father. So it's really amazing to see how this process builds up. Yeah.
Yes.
So you say longitudinal. So how many years were you looking at?
So basically, the longest one was a little bit more than 1 year. So from the adoption and to the year after adoption. So because I wanted to observe also the evaluation of language.
Okay.
So I wanted to see the short term, the medium, and what I assume is
could be the
long term. Yeah. But of course,
over 1 year, if it's very young child, you can see a lot of development. Obviously. Yeah. I don't know if this came up before I arrived, but when you have these kids adopted and the children speak a different language than the parents, and the parents don't speak the children's language, in this situation, well, first of all, how what are the chances of the child actually keeping the heritage language? Or asked differently, what are the characteristics of a family in which this situation arises, but the children actually keep the language, even though the parents cannot speak the heritage language? What allows them to keep it going?
Yeah, that's interesting, because that was my the structure of my research, because I had, on one side, I have two families adopting a Spanish speaker, and on the other side, I had a Russian speaker, so the child was Russian speaker. So because I want to compare the two cases.
And the parents are?
Italian speakers. Both of them, yeah. Okay. So in one case, we were looking at intercomprehension, so between related languages. In the second case, we were not in intercomprehension case. And the Russian speaking child switched to Italian much faster than the Spanish.
I can imagine,
speaking child. And that on what I based my conclusions, that intercomprehension can be an adjustment strategy, because of course the child wants to communicate, needs to communicate, and to bond with the parents. So basically, they have to negotiate a strategy of communication implicitly, not explicitly. So in the case of the Russian-speaking child, they negotiate Italian. So the child decides, I think, implicitly to learn Italian, just to really be fast, and he was really, really good at it. And if I'm not saying forget, because it's not the right word, but he put aside Russian faster than the Spanish-speaking child. So it was really like, for example, to give you a time span, the Spanish, the Chilean child started to speak Italian like 100% after more or less 6 months. the Russian child after 1 month.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, because of course is easily because he knew that the parents would have not understand him.
Yeah, but I imagine, as you mentioned before, it also pretty much depends on the communication style of the child and of the family, right? I mean, there are children who are much chattier and more open, and the whole situation behind an adoption, which is a very complicated and sometimes very sad situation also. I mean, it's not only the language and the culture, but the adapting to new people in their life and reference people that they have.
Yeah.
So these are many aspects to consider. I can imagine that
Of course,
many things played into this. Yeah. But that's quite quick. We were talking before about how much, I think Tetsu, you asked it, right? How much or how, is it, do you think that these children, even if they put, you just mentioned before, they don't forget their language, but it's put aside because obviously then the dominant language is the one that they are using in the family in order to communicate with each other, and also the community or the school or daycare where they have to function in the other language. But to your knowledge, how often does it happen that these children, even maybe if they were not that verbal, but also when they were verbal in the caregiver's language, let's say the first caregiver's language, do they have an easier access to this language later on? I ask this for the following reason. I know 2 families who have adopted children, and these children are now in their teens. And 2 were adopted. They were non-verbal Chinese children adopted by a family here in Europe, and they were not verbal when they were adopted, but they followed then Chinese classes, and somehow it felt like they would remember things easier or quicker, and that was very interesting for me to hear and to witness. What do you think, or what are your observations about this, or do you know more about this you can share with us?
Yeah, as you said, it's a very delicate question because it's not like putting a seed on the brain, and then sometimes letting the child attending, for example, heritage schools helps, because of course the language is trained somehow. But on some other cases, the child refuses to goes to heritage schools because that's what makes him different from others. You know what I mean? So it really, I for example, I knew some parents who really insisted, because they use this expression, we want to leave the door open for our child. So in the future, I want him to be able to go back to Russia, or to speak with Russian people, not to neglect this part of his life. But that didn't work out. The child just didn't want to. So I think that what I learned about adoption, because I'm a linguist, I'm not. No, there are a lot of things that I yet to learn about adoption as well. Is that every single path is particular. Yeah. So what, in my opinion, what parents can do is really to avoid negative attitudes, and to avoid to transmitting like the some messages, some inherent messages, like Italian or our language is most important. It's more important. But on the other side, they also pushing children towards the heritage language is a pressure as well. So I think that what parents can do is really listening to the child, and somehow treasure this language. And I insist that the first moments, the first moments of adoption is important, because it's when child gets the impression of being welcome in with all that means, and then of course there are some parents who wish for their children to be bilinguals. They told me, I mean, I really would like him to be bilingual, because he's also is a plus. But I think that child should be able to decide for himself and to build, because identity is something really, really delicate. So there are some researchers who show that, for example, teenagers is important to know more about their identities, also so about languages, because it's the moment that when they build their identity. But I'm not comfortable in you know what I mean, saying, okay, let's go for the heritage language, because
yes, absolutely. No.
Well, clearly, as you mentioned, if the parents can speak that heritage language, it would help a lot.
of course.
If the parents can use that language, even if it's their second language, at least the kids see the relevance of the heritage language, other than the fact that it was something that he or she was using before. It's very hard to make that language pertinent in the child's life, in the new environment, if that language is not used at all in a useful way, I guess.
Yes.
There is, for me, was a definition which is from Annika de Hauer, which is harmonious bilingual development.
Yes.
You're familiar with. So for me, it's the concept that says everything.
Yes. It's more a holistic approach on everything. So that's that takes into account all aspects involved, not only the language, but the culture, the character of the child, and the situation in the family, outside of the family, etc. Yes. And I think in one of your papers, you also mentioned the wish that also teachers or people in the community would have this way of approach where they englobe, or they have this this way of communicating with children who might not speak the language yet. So
well, school reflects the attitude of society, so it's really important. It's really important. That's why, for example, now that I work, I research intercomprehension and plurilingual education. For me, is really relevant for inclusion of plurilingual pupils. So no matter why they are plurilingual, for me, school had this great opportunity to play a role in inclusion of society, I would say. So I hope that language education becomes more inclusive in this sense, and that teachers are really given the opportunity to experience plurilingual education, because it does not only help plurilingual students to make the best out of their repertoire, but also they help students to integrate cognitive and emotion, which is really, really important.
Yes, and some kind of a training of the teacher. Very often, we had this in other sessions. Teachers don't need to be able to speak all the languages of all their students, right? Or the children that are in the class. But with this intercomprehension kind of technique or practice, this would be much easier, right? Because you focus on what you can understand. Maybe you know, as I said before, maybe you know Spanish and you can understand Italian easier, etc. And we are talking about now the verbal language, right? I know that Tetsu might have a question about the non-verbal language.
Well, to really understand intercomprehension a little better, because I don't think I kind of know it, but to really know the clear definition of it, can you tell us a bit more about is intercomprehension just on a verbal form, or if I write something and for you to read, is that considered intercomprehension? Like if a Japanese writes something in Japanese, but it's got Chinese characters, a Chinese can sort of understand, but if it's spoken, then they don't understand each other at all. Is that
Well,
considered intercomprehension?
I would say, I mean, intercomprehension, as you know, works between related languages. So, namely, languages who are from the same linguistic families, because, of course, there are more things in common. But the idea is to exploit the spontaneous or inherent potential of these related languages by the in-depth study of regularities. So this is the approach. Chinese and Japanese and Chinese do not belong to the same linguistic family, because Japanese is a Japonic language and Chinese is a Sino-Tibetan language. However, in the written form, they share some characters. So we could say that they are partially intelligible.
So maybe we can see it, and I think also you mentioned it in one of your articles, that there is a continuum, right, of comprehension, intelligibility.
Yeah,
I got it.
exactly.
Of the languages.
Oh, difficult words.
Yes, sometimes I just have my
it's just all a gradient.
It's a gradient. Yes, exactly. And I like this this aspect that you now mentioned, Tetsu, that it's between. We have on one side those who are really in parented languages or that have a lot in common, and where you can listen to it, and maybe sometimes even the intonations are very similar to in between the languages. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have languages that are not comprehensible when you speak them, but partly when you read them. And this is highly interesting. I mean, this is. But maybe I'm going too far away from.
No. Yeah, you really have a point, and that. Also, what we try to show students, because we all grew up with this idea that if you cannot speak a language, you don't know the language, and that is not it's not the direction of even not of European Europe, the Conseil d'Europe. We speak about partial competencies, and so it really depends on what you need to do with this language. So if you, for example, you receive mails, for example, one of my students today told me, I like intercomprehension because, for example, when I read some mails, I go back to the thread, and I go back to the original mail in, I don't know, Romanian. And so I don't need to read all the mail. I just need to grasp the meaning.
Yeah.
And this is an example. So written language and global sense. And I have to charge my...
Okay.
Otherwise, yeah.
Yes, and I can imagine that if we even go further, I was thinking now about also families who might adopt a deaf child, and the deaf child might be able to use, I don't know, the American Sign Language and goes to the UK, and there are similarities also in the sign language and in the comprehension and in the lip reading and everything. That would be interesting too. So I mean, I would like to englobe everyone, because we all have different, expectations are different skills in languages. So it's not only the verbal language, but it can involve all sectors.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
So what are the outcomes of this study? Like, the more we know about intercomprehension, how do we apply this knowledge in society, sort of maximize the value of intercomprehension in teaching or in certain institutions? How do you see this being applied actually directly in the real world sort of sense?
Yeah, I mean, now, for example, I'm working in a project called UNITA, Universitas Mont, And the purpose of this project is really to expand the potential of intercomprehension and to many different targets. So students, teachers, staff of the university. But what I really like of this approach is that as a teacher, I like the feelings it triggers in all these targets. So basically, students of intercomprehension love to get the hang of unknown languages, so discovery.
I totally understand that. I totally
Really?
really.
I think that is on a main point. It gives you a lot of power
in that.
Yeah.
You
actually broaden your horizons, so it's really empowering. Yeah, and they also like to share their own knowledge with classmates who do not speak the same language. So explain how it works, explain the meaning of untranslatable words. And I think that they help them to get to know each other, to disclose memories. Soft skills, basically. So I see the potential of plurilingual education in general. Of course, we are talking about intercomprehension, but there are also other approaches. There are Eveyolang, there is intercultural approach, integrated language approach, and then there is CLIL also, which is it's not a plurilingual approach, but it works in similar ways. So I see really plurilingual education as an inclusive way of seeing education, because, of course, we know that we live in a diverse society, but often schools it's not easy to develop this kind of competence. And I really hope that teachers who are really enthusiastic as well when we propose these approaches get the opportunity to do that themselves.
And is there a place where if we have teachers who are following this and they say, I would like to learn more about this, where could they learn about this? Maybe they know, but just for you to share maybe a place where they can find more information about this.
Well, there are some framework they can consult. So the CARAP, donc ou le FREPA, je pense en anglais, c'est Framework of Plurilingual Approaches, and is the place where plurilingual competencies are described. So what we mean for plurilingual competencies, because we know what linguistic competence is. But plurilingual competence is a different competence. So I think that I would start from there. And then there are many websites. They can consult, for example, Myriadi, which is a very rich website with a lot of activities. But just surfing the net, you will find putting intercomprehension, Eveyolang, you will find really, because it's really an open world, so there are lots of materials which are
yes, absolutely
available.
Yeah, we will share some links in the comments on YouTube, so if someone is looking for them. Thank you.
Just to come back to what I was talking about, Chinese and Japanese or different pairs of languages, Spanish and Italian. Have you seen like a very unexpected pairs of languages that are really intercomprehensible?
It's a difficult question, because if you know more or less which are the related language, it's kind of expected. I mean,
when I watch Korean TV, I know nothing about Korean, but I feel like I understand because of the intonation. So it just feels like I'm watching the news and I see the images and I feel like I almost understand. And every once in a while, I'll hear a keyword. And then I kind of feel like I understand. Maybe I do understand. I don't know. But, probably not.
Let's discover.
Exactly. It's a little bit like one of your articles. Where maybe you understand more than you think, right?
Yeah.
So because you pick up things, and as I said before, maybe the intonation is really something that captures you. Say, oh, is this now maybe Japanese or Chinese? And then you say, oh no, it's not. So it's something else. It's something that happened to me when I listened to Norwegian or Danish. Sometimes it takes me away and says, what is this now? Oh, okay, it's this one. But it can also happen with languages that maybe you didn't listen to for a long time, and all of a sudden in a context where you don't expect them, someone talks it and you say, this is actually a language that I know. So it's very weird things that are going on. I would like to do a shout out to those who are following us and to invite them also to maybe ask a question in the comments, please. We're very happy to share your questions, or just say hello, just that we know who is there. Yes.
Yes, to everybody watching on YouTube, Facebook,
and
YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter.
Twitter.
We've been streaming live on Twitter also since for a while now.
Yeah.
So shout out to everybody who's watching, and if you're watching the recording of this interview, you're also welcome to put in your questions, and we'll pick them up as we go.
Yeah, we continue.
All right. So we are sort of coming to the last part of the interview, and we'd like to ask our special guest, what is your vision, I guess, going forward? What are your long-term goals, I guess, for this research? What do you see developing as we move forward for, I don't know, for the academic world, or even for families directly, parents?
Well, as I said, I think the school education has a really big role, because parents, especially in adoptive families, really listen to teachers, because of course they think that they know how to handle this, for example, this language transition of their children. So I think that I really think that teachers should be empowered, should really being able to know more about how exploit the linguistic repertoire of their children, and to advise parents, because what I observe that often adoptive families lack of advice, I mean, language-wise. So what they can do, I mean, if they don't have advice, they follow spontaneous paths. Sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't work, but it's not their fault. So I think that, my idea is that schools need to be empowered, need to know more about how language works in specific, which are not so specific anymore, profile, like plurilingual pupils. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I sometimes still hear teachers who said to bilingual parents to speak the school language at home. Because we know that, but for them it's something really. Probably comes from the immersion ideology that children need to be really into this, but this creates a lot of damages, because at so many levels. So it's so wrong to say that, but it's understandable. So
of course, they're coming from a good place. Also, of course,
they're coming from the good place. Exactly.
But,
exactly.
Yes, but it's still the monolingual mindset, right?
And monolingual mindset.
It's like using the wrong mold somehow.
Exactly. It's not. Yeah, it's not only this, but also, for example, May talked about the multilingual turn in education. So for example, if a bilingual student switch from one language to another into while during the lesson, maybe the evaluation, maybe we need to tell teachers that it's his own way to create a concept, to conceptualize the content. Is not a lack of knowledge. It's a different way of conceptualizing knowledge. Like, this is also very important to tell teachers that bilingual work in a different way, so they can switch from one language and everyone, I think that maybe if you have experience of living abroad, and I think that we all have this experience, is really common sense that sometimes you need a word from a different language to explain yourself, maybe because in your language it doesn't exist, it's not the same thing. So using another language helps you to progress, to advance in the knowledge, not to go back. So I think that teachers need to again have the opportunity to know more.
To get educated themselves, about what is actually promoting the language knowledge and all the skills, right, in the individual. I have one question about, or maybe it's one wish that I would have in this kind of research, knowing some families who have adopted children from completely different languages and where language backgrounds, and where the parents themselves have 2 or 3 languages. So in the family itself, they would have 4 languages with the one of the child, so the heritage language of the child. What kind of research has been done in these multilingual families, really multilingual, not only bilingual? I don't want to minimize the fact, but I can imagine that it becomes even more complex if a child then is confronted with 2 languages at home plus 1 in the community, and none of these is the language the child was exposed to before joining the new family.
Well, so I think that I mean, I don't know any specific research of but I discussed about it with Annick de Houwer, and she told me that there was positive experience about that. When I was a PhD, I asked her what I had the opportunity to ask her directly, and I think that there is no reason to think that more language they have, the worst. I mean, I know that the question didn't go to this direction, but probably it's to the child to decide which language, and probably there are choices to make. So, for example, at school you speak this language, at home we speak language with your siblings. And of course, because we know that the child, bilinguals, need to have something set up. So, but I think there are many configurations possible that it would be interesting to observe this kind of situation.
Very much.
Thank you very much. We do think that we hope that all this information and all this brings about awareness. I think that's a very important word here. Just the fact that you know it, just knowing it makes a whole big difference for these teachers, for example, as you were mentioning. I think, I mean, I hope you agree with me that in the past few years, it has been getting better and better. I think people are getting more and more aware of bilingualism, multilingualism, and all this is improving. With internet, with the world is getting smaller and smaller, and so hopefully it'll continue in this direction with your very important information and research. So thank you very much for doing this. Thank you for sharing all your expertise with us today. Thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule, I'm sure. So we really want to
thank you for inviting me to be that kind. I really enjoy. talking with you.
Fantastic.
Our
And
pleasure.
we want to do another shout out to everybody who's watching on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch this live or on the recordings. Do check out all our videos, our previous videos. We've been doing this for a little over 2 years now. Or
Yes.
yeah, a little over 2 years now.
It's 2 years.
Congratulations.
3 years? That's 3 years? No, 2020, 21, 22, 22
2020.
years.
It's 2, yes. 22
Going on
months.
3. We're going on 3. This is precisely
Yes.
the last session before
Exactly.
we enter the third year. So thank you again, Dr. Fiorentino. Thank you for your time. And we will tell everybody that the next session will be actually in August. We will take a little break in July. So we'll be coming back in August with very, very, very well-known polyglot. His name is Richard Simcott. So he will be coming. He has a daughter that he has raised in 5 languages. So he's got his tricks up his sleeve. So we want to pick his brain on how he does it in his ways. So definitely hope that you guys will come around and check it out. So we will see you in 2 months in the third Tuesday of the month of August.
Yes.
Okay, so you guys have a very wonderful summer to you all, and we'll see you in 2 months.
Yes.
It has already started.
Indeed. It's today. It's today. Today is summer solstice. It's the longest day of the year.
And you can tell. We are melting.
That's right. Okay, thank you everybody.
Very much.
See you next time.
Sì,
Bye.
bye. Grazie a voi, alla prossima. Arrivederci.
Bye, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.